Adana had always known something was different about her life, but she never understood why. She grew up in a big house with her parents, Chief and Madam Okafor, and her younger sister, Kayamaka. From the outside, it looked like they were a happy family, but inside, Adana felt like she didn't belong. Kayamaka was treated like a princess. Their parents showered her with love and affection, buying her the finest clothes, the most expensive shoes, and the best toys. She attended the most prestigious private school in town, driven to and from school by a chauffeur. Madam Okafor personally packed her lunch every morning, making sure Kayamaka had the best meals. When guests visited, their mother proudly introduced Kayamaka, boasting about her intelligence, beauty, and how she would become a great woman one day. But for Adana, life was different. She was sent to a public school, forced to wake up early to walk several miles every morning. Her uniform was always a size too big or too small, passed down from a distant relative. She never got new shoes. Instead, she wore old ones that had been patched too many times. There were no drivers to take her to school, no expensive lunchboxes filled with special treats. Most days, she carried nothing but a small loaf of bread and water. At home, the unfair treatment continued. Kayamaka had a spacious, beautifully decorated bedroom filled with dolls, colorful curtains, and a soft bed with silk sheets. Adana, on the other hand, slept in a tiny, poorly furnished room at the back of the house. Her mattress was thin, and the room was barely lit. Whenever she asked why she was treated differently, her mother's response was always the same. Be grateful for what you have, Adana. Don't ask foolish questions. She tried to be grateful. She worked hard at school, hoping that if she brought home good grades, her parents would notice her. But no matter how well she performed, there were no celebrations, no words of encouragement. Kayamaka, even with average grades, was always praised. One rainy afternoon, Adana returned from school, drenched from head to toe. She had forgotten her umbrella at home and had no choice but to walk in the heavy downpour. As she stepped into the house, shivering from the cold, she heard laughter coming from the dining room. She walked in and saw Kayamaka eating a delicious meal of rice, fried chicken, and plantain. "Where is my food?" Adana asked, her stomach rumbling. Madam Okafor barely looked at her. "There's no extra food. You should have come home earlier." Tears welled in Adana's eyes. She had spent the whole day at school, studying hard, while Kayamaka, who had been driven home early, got to enjoy a special meal. That night, Adana went to bed hungry. The mistreatment wasn't just about food or clothing. It was in the way they spoke to her, the way they dismissed her feelings. If Kayamaka was sick, the entire household would be in chaos, with their mother running up and down to get medicine. But when Adana fell sick, she was given paracetamol and told to rest. Despite everything, Adana still held on to hope. She believed that maybe one day, her parents would truly see her, that they would realize she was just as worthy of love as Kayamaka. But that hope came crashing down one evening when she overheard a conversation that changed her life forever. She had been scrubbing the kitchen floor when she heard her parents talking in the living room. Their voices were low, but something about the tone made her pause. "We cannot keep treating her like this," Chief Okafor said. "She is growing up. She will start asking questions." "And what do you want me to do?" Madam Okafor scoffed. "Tell her the truth, that she is not even ours." Adana froze. Her breath caught in her throat. "Not theirs." What did that mean? "She should be grateful we took her in at all," Madam Okafor continued. "It was an act of pity. Her real mother was just a foolish girl who got pregnant and abandoned her. If we hadn't taken her, who knows where she would be now?" Adana felt her whole world shatter. She had always wondered why she was treated differently, but she had never imagined this. She wasn't their real daughter. She was just a responsibility they had taken on out of pity. She wanted to run into the room, to ask them why they never told her. But she was too afraid of what they might say. Instead, she crept back to her room, her heart pounding. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what she had just learned. The people she had called her parents all her life were not her parents. The love she had been desperately seeking was never meant for her. She cried herself to sleep that night. From that moment on, everything felt different. The house that once felt like home now felt like a prison. The warmth she had once craved from her parents had turned into an unbearable coldness. The truth weighed on her like a heavy stone, pressing against her chest with every breath she took. She wanted answers. She needed to know who she really was. But the fear of their reaction kept her silent. For now, she had to endure. But deep down, she knew she couldn't live like this forever. One day, something would have to change. Adana sat on the edge of her small bed, staring at the cracked ceiling of her tiny room. The weight of the truth she had discovered about her adoption had not left her mind, but she had forced herself to keep going. If she allowed herself to dwell on the pain, she feared she might never recover. The sound of her name being called interrupted her thoughts. It was her father's deep, commanding voice. Slowly, she stood up, wiped her eyes, and made her way to the living room. Chief Okafor and Madame Okafor sat on the couch, their expressions unreadable. Kayamaka lounged nearby, lazily scrolling through her phone, paying no attention to Adana. "We have made a decision," her father said, his voice firm. Adana swallowed hard, knowing that whatever was coming would not be good for her. "What decision?" she asked cautiously. "It is time for you to get married," he said without emotion. Adana's heart stopped for a moment. "Married?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Madame Okafor crossed her arms and sighed. "Yes. You are 21 now. You should be grateful we have found a suitor for you." Adana shook her head in disbelief. "But I am still in school. I am not ready for marriage." Madame Okafor scoffed. "School? You should know by now that your education is not a priority. We have already spent enough on you. It is time for you to start your own life." Adana felt a lump form in her throat. She looked at her father, hoping for some form of explanation, but his face remained cold and distant. "Who is he?" she asked hesitantly. "His name is Obinna," her father answered. "He is a farmer from the next village. A hard-working man. He is ready to take you as his wife." Adana's stomach churned. A farmer. She had nothing against farmers, but she had always dreamed of furthering her education, becoming something more. And now, she was being handed over to a man she had never met like a piece of property. "This is not fair," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are you forcing me into this?" Kayamaka let out a laugh. "Why are you acting like you have a choice? Be thankful someone even wants to marry you." Anger bubbled inside Adana, but she knew there was no use arguing. These people, her so-called family, had never cared about what she wanted. They had always treated her differently, and now they were throwing her away as if she meant nothing. "When is the wedding?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "In a week," her father answered. "Everything has been arranged." A week. That was all the time she had left before her life would be taken from her. Before she would be sent away to live with a man she did not know. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to cry in front of them. Crying would not change anything. It never had. She turned around and walked away, heading straight to her room. As soon as she shut the door, she collapsed onto her bed and let the tears fall. How had her life come to this? First, she found out she was not truly their daughter, and now they were selling her off like she was nothing. The next few days passed in a blur. The preparations for her wedding were minimal, almost as if they wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. A simple dress was given to her, nothing fancy. Madame Okafor made it clear that there was no reason to spend money on an elaborate ceremony for her. Adana barely ate. She barely slept. The thought of being married off against her will consume her every waking moment. The night before the wedding, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. There had to be a way out. She could not let them ruin her life like this. She thought about running away, but where would she go? She had no money, no real family. If she left, she would be completely alone in the world. Morning came too soon. The house was unusually quiet, almost as if even they knew this was wrong. Adana was dressed in the plain white gown and led to the small gathering outside. Obina stood there, a tall man with rough hands and a face that carried years of hardship. He looked at her with indifference, as if she was just another responsibility he had to bear. The ceremony was brief. No smiles, no joy. Just words exchanged and papers signed. By the end of the day, Adana was no longer part of the Okafor household. She belonged to Obina now. As she sat in the cart that would take her to her new home, she looked back at the house one last time. Madame Okafor and Chief Okafor did not even bother to watch her leave. Kayamaka stood by the doorway, smirking. Adana turned away, swallowing the lump in her throat. Whatever awaited her in Obina's home, she would face it. She had no other choice. Adana sat in silence as the tricycle rattled along the dirt road, carrying her away from the only home she had ever known. Though she had never truly felt welcome in the Okafor household, at least it was familiar. Now, she was being sent off into an uncertain future with a man she barely knew. Obina sat beside her, his face unreadable, his hands gripping the metal frame of the tricycle. He had not spoken much since the ceremony, and Adana had no idea what kind of life awaited her. The journey to Obina's home felt endless. The farther they traveled, the more isolated the surroundings became. The lush trees and distant hills that once seemed beautiful now filled her with dread. As they neared the village, she caught glimpses of simple mud houses with thatched roofs. Children ran barefoot, chasing one another as their mothers pounded yam outside. The sight was a stark contrast to the life she had known, even if it had been an unfair one. Finally, Obina brought the tricycle to a stop in front of a small, modest house. The walls were cracked, and the roof was patched in several places. Adana swallowed hard. This was her new home. "Come down," Obina said gruffly, his voice as rough as his hands. She obeyed, stepping carefully onto the dry, dusty ground. Obina led her inside without another word. The interior was as simple as the exterior. One small sitting area with a wooden bench, a kitchen with clay pots stacked in a corner, and a bedroom that smelled of old fabric and smoke. A tiny window let in faint sunlight, casting long shadows on the walls. "This is where you will stay," Obina said, gesturing to the bed in the corner. "You are my wife now. You will wake up early to cook, fetch water from the stream, and tend to the farm. Do not expect an easy life here." Adana bit her lip, her hands trembling slightly. "I understand," she said softly. Obina studied her for a moment, then grunted. "There is food in the kitchen. Eat if you are hungry." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the dimly lit room. Adana sank onto the bed, hugging herself tightly. She had hoped, foolishly, that maybe Obina would be kind, that maybe he would see how much she had suffered already. But his coldness told her otherwise. He had not married her for love. He had married her because it was convenient. The days that followed were grueling. Adana woke before dawn to fetch water from the stream, balancing heavy clay pots on her head as she walked the long distance back to the house. She cooked meals over an open fire, stirring large pots of soup while the heat made her skin sting. The farm work was the hardest. Her hands, once soft, became callous from digging, planting, and harvesting under the scorching sun. Obina spoke little. When he did, his words were brief and laced with impatience. He did not hit her, but his indifference was just as painful. He expected her to work without complaint, to accept her fate without question. At night, she lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling, wondering how her life had come to this. One evening, as she returned from the farm, she found an elderly woman standing outside the house. The woman had kind eyes and a face lined with years of wisdom. She smiled gently as Adana approached. "You must be Obina's new wife," she said. "Yes, Ma," Adana replied respectfully. "My name is Mama Nkechi. I live nearby. I came to see how you are settling in." Adana hesitated. No one had asked her that question since she arrived. "I am managing," she said carefully. Mama Nkechi nodded knowingly. "It is not easy, is it?" Tears pricked Adana's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She did not want to seem weak. "You are young," Mama Nkechi continued, "and you were not given a choice in this marriage. But do not let this place break you. You must find your own strength." Adana swallowed hard. "How?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mama Nkechi placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "By not losing yourself. By remembering that you are more than just someone's wife. You are still Adana." The words stayed with Adana long after Mama Nkechi left. That night, as she lay on her small bed, she thought about what it meant to be strong. She had spent her whole life seeking love and approval from people who never truly cared for her. Maybe it was time to stop looking for acceptance and start finding her own path. The next morning, she woke up with a new determination. She still had no power over her circumstances, but she could control how she faced them. She threw herself into her work, not as a defeated girl, but as someone who refused to be broken. She learned quickly, mastering the art of farming and cooking. She did not complain when Obina ignored her, nor did she cry when the loneliness became unbearable. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, the villagers began to notice her resilience. The women at the market smiled at her when she passed, and the children called out her name. Even Mama Nkechi visited often, bringing small gifts and offering words of encouragement. But Obina remained unchanged. He remained distant, his emotions locked away. Adana often wondered if he regretted marrying her, if he wished he had chosen someone else. Yet, she never asked. She had long learned that expecting kindness from him was pointless. Then, one evening, everything changed. Obina came home late, his clothes torn, his face bruised. Adana gasped as she rushed to him. "What happened?" she asked, reaching for his arm. He winced but did not pull away. "There was a fight in the village," he said, his voice strained. "Some men tried to steal from my farm." Without hesitation, Adana fetched water and a clean cloth. She sat beside him, dabbing at his wounds with gentle hands. For the first time since their marriage, Obina allowed her to take care of him without resistance. As she worked, she noticed his eyes watching her. There was something different in them, something she could not quite place. "Why are you doing this?" he finally asked. Adana paused, meeting his gaze. "Because you are my husband," she said simply, "and because I do not wish to see you in pain." Obina looked away, as if struggling with emotions he did not know how to express. For the first time, the walls around his heart seemed to crack just a little. That night, as Adana lay in bed, she realized something. She had not chosen this life, but maybe, just maybe, she could still find a way to make it her own. Weeks turned into months, and Adana gradually adjusted to her life as Obina's wife. Though their marriage had begun on a foundation of force and silence, something had shifted since the night she tended to his wounds. He still maintained his distance, but there were fleeting moments when his eyes softened, when he seemed less like a stranger and more like a man struggling with his own demons. One evening, as Adana returned from the stream with 2 large pots of water balanced on her head, she found Obina sitting outside their small home. His face was troubled, his hands clasped together. It was rare for him to be home so early, and even rarer for him to look so lost in thought. She set down the water and wiped the sweat from her brow. "Is everything all right?" she asked hesitantly. Obina exhaled deeply, as if debating whether to answer. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "There is something I need to tell you." Adana's heart pounded. She had never heard him sound so serious. "I know I have not been the husband you deserve," he admitted, his voice low. "I did not ask for this marriage either." Adana's breath caught in her throat. This was the first time he had acknowledged the circumstances that had brought them together. "My parents wanted me to marry a rich man's daughter," he continued. "Someone who could bring wealth into our family. But I refused. I wanted to marry for love, or not at all. When I rejected their choice, they saw me as a disgrace. They cut me off, left me to fend for myself." Adana listened intently, piecing together the fragments of his life. She had always assumed he was just another man forced into an unwanted marriage, but now she saw there was more to his silence, more to his coldness. "They only agreed to let me stay in this house if I married someone they chose," he went on. "Your father, he needed to get rid of you. My parents needed to prove they still had control over me. So they struck a deal." A sharp pain twisted in Adana's chest. She had known she was unwanted, but hearing it confirmed in such a brutal way made it harder to bear. Obinna looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "I did not hate you, Adana," he said. "I just didn't know how to live with this, with us." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting an orange glow over the village. Adana's mind raced. She had spent so much time resenting her fate that she had never considered Obinna's own struggles. He, too, was a prisoner of circumstance. That night, as she lay awake, she thought about his words. If they were both victims of their family's choices, then maybe they could find a way to shape their own future. The next morning, Adana rose before dawn as usual, but something was different. When she stepped outside to begin her daily chores, she found Obinna already at the stream, drawing water. It was the first time he had ever done something she was expected to do alone. They worked side by side in silence. He helped her fetch firewood, clear the farm, and prepare meals. The villagers noticed the change. Whispers spread through the marketplace. Obinna, the once distant husband, was now seen carrying baskets, mending the fence, even speaking to his wife in public. Mama Nkechi was the first to approach Adana about it. "I have lived in this village for many years," she said with a knowing smile. "I have seen many marriages. But I have never seen a man change unless a woman has touched his heart." Adana felt warmth rise to her cheeks. She had never imagined Obinna seeing her as more than just an obligation, yet now, he was acting like a man who cared. One evening, as they sat outside their home after dinner, Obinna spoke again. "I have been thinking," he said. "You have worked hard since you came here. You have endured more than you should have. And yet, you never gave up." Adana looked down at her hands, rough from months of labor. "I did what I had to do." He nodded. "And that is why I want to give you a choice." Her heart skipped a beat. "A choice." "I do not want you to stay in this marriage just because you were forced into it," he said slowly. "If you wish to leave, I will not stop you. I will give you enough money to start a new life somewhere else." Adana's mind spun. She had dreamed of escape so many times, of running far away from everything that had chained her down. And now, here it was, the opportunity to be free. But as she looked at Obinna, at the man who had slowly started to change, she realized something unexpected. This place, this life, had shaped her into someone stronger. And this man, despite his flaws, had begun to see her as more than just an unwanted wife. "I need time to think," she said finally. Obinna nodded. "Take as long as you need." That night, Adana lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel like a prisoner. She had been given a choice, a power she had never had before. But what would she do with it? The answer, she realized, would change everything. Adana spent the next few days in deep contemplation. The choice Obina had given her was one she had never imagined she would have. For the first time in her life, she had power over her own fate. She could leave and start afresh, away from the life she had been forced into. But another part of her hesitated. Something had changed between her and Obina, something she had never expected: understanding. She watched him closely as he went about his daily tasks. He was no longer the cold, distant man she had married. He now spoke to her kindly, helped her with chores, and even brought small gifts from the market. It was a transformation she never thought possible, and yet, here it was. One evening, as they sat outside under the moonlit sky, Obina turned to her. "Have you made your decision?" he asked quietly. Adana took a deep breath, looking at the man beside her. "Yes," she said. "I will stay." A flicker of emotion crossed Obina's face, but he quickly masked it. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "For the first time, I feel like I belong somewhere. And I do not want to run anymore. I want to build something for myself. Here." A slow smile spread across Obina's lips. It was the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Then we start anew," he said. From that day on, things changed for the better. Obina and Adana worked together, not as strangers forced into a marriage, but as partners striving to create a life they could both be proud of. The villagers noticed the shift, and respect for Adana grew. She was no longer seen as the unfortunate girl forced into marriage, but as a strong woman who had found her place. Months passed, and Adana discovered a new passion: trading. With some of the money Obina had saved, she started buying and selling farm produce at the local market. Her business flourished, and soon, she was making enough to contribute significantly to their household. For the first time, she had financial independence, and with it came confidence. Obina, too, changed. He began to share more of himself with her, telling her about his dreams, his fears, and his past. He admitted that he had been afraid to open up, that he had built walls around his heart because he didn't want to be hurt. But Adana's strength had made him realize that love was not about control or obligation, it was about choice. One evening, as they sat outside watching the stars, Obina took her hand in his. "I never thought I would say this," he said softly, "but I am grateful for this marriage. Not because it was forced upon us, but because it led me to you." Adana's heart swelled with emotion. She had spent so long believing she was unwanted, believing she would never be loved. But here, in this quiet village, with the man who had once been a stranger, she had found something she never thought possible: happiness. Their love grew, not out of obligation, but out of mutual respect and understanding. They became a team, facing life's challenges together. And as the seasons changed, so did their hearts, beating in harmony with one another. Adana had been forced into marriage, but she had found something unexpected: a home, a purpose, and a love that was truly hers. And for the first time in her life, she was free. Years passed, and the small, modest life that Adana and Obina built together flourished beyond their imagination. Their trading business expanded, and with time, they ventured into larger markets, dealing in wholesale agricultural produce and distribution. What once started as a simple market trade grew into a thriving enterprise, making them one of the wealthiest couples in the region. Adana, once an abandoned girl forced into a marriage she did not want, was now a powerful businesswoman. She traveled between villages, negotiating deals, investing wisely, and ensuring their wealth multiplied. Obina, too, had grown into a formidable businessman. Together, they built a legacy, one of resilience, love, and determination. Despite their wealth, they remained humble. They continued to live in their village, though in a much larger and more comfortable home. They never forgot where they started, and Adana made it a habit to help those in need, especially young girls who were neglected or forced into unfortunate circumstances like she had once been. Meanwhile, in the city, Adana's adoptive parents were facing a completely different fate. Their once thriving business empire was crumbling. A series of reckless financial decisions, coupled with the betrayal of a trusted business partner, left them in heavy debt. One by one, their properties were seized by the banks. Their luxurious mansion, expensive cars, and extravagant lifestyle all vanished within months. The people who once praised and admired them disappeared as well. Kayamaka, who had always lived in privilege, was in utter disbelief. The life she knew, the endless shopping trips, parties, and international vacations, was gone. She and her parents were forced to move into a small, run-down apartment in the outskirts of the city. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to struggle. As the days passed, desperation set in. With nowhere else to turn, Kayamaka's father, Chief Okeke, suggested something that made them all pause. "We need to find Adana," he said one evening, his voice heavy with regret. "She is wealthy now. She can help us." At the mention of Adana's name, Kayamaka's stomach twisted. She had spent her entire life looking down on her adopted sister, treating her as less than family. And now, that same girl held the power to save them. "But after everything we did to her," her mother said hesitantly, "do you think she will even listen to us?" "She is kind," Chief Okeke said, rubbing his temples. "She was always kind, even when we did not deserve it." With no other choice, they made the long journey to the village where Adana lived. They arrived dusty and tired, their fine clothes replaced with simple, worn-out garments. As they stood outside the gates of Adana's grand home, Kayamaka hesitated. The home was more beautiful than anything she had ever lived in. The irony was painful. Her adopted sister, the one who was treated as less, now had everything. A guard approached them. "Who are you looking for?" he asked. Chief Okeke cleared his throat. "We are here to see Adana. Tell her it is her family." Minutes later, they were led into the compound. When Adana stepped out and saw them, she froze. The sight of them, once so powerful, now so desperate, stirred something deep within her. She had imagined this moment before, but now that it was here, she felt no satisfaction in their suffering. Only pity. Kayamaka's mother stepped forward first. "Adana," she began, but her voice cracked with emotion. We are sorry. For everything." Adana did not respond immediately. She let the silence stretch between them, letting them feel the weight of their actions. Kayamaka, who had once been so proud, swallowed hard. "Adana, please, we have nothing left. We need your help." Adana studied her, remembering the years of pain and humiliation Kayamaka had caused her. But she also saw something else: humility. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine desperation. Obinna stood beside Adana, watching quietly, letting her decide. He knew this was not just about money, it was about closure. Finally, Adana spoke. "Come in." Adana sat in the grand sitting room of her home, watching as her former family sat across from her. The once proud Chief Okeke now looked worn and defeated, his fine clothes replaced by simple patched garments. His wife, once a woman of elegance, now clutched her hands in her lap, barely able to meet Adana's gaze. And then there was Kayamaka, the sister who had always mocked her, now sitting in silence, her face etched with shame. A heavy silence filled the room. Adana let them sit in their discomfort, allowing them to reflect on their past actions. They had come to her with outstretched hands, seeking help, hoping that the girl they had mistreated for years would save them from ruin. "You want my help," Adana finally said, her voice calm but firm. "You expect me to offer you shelter, money, and a way out of your suffering." Chief Okeke swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes, Adana. We have no one else to turn to." Adana tilted her head slightly. "Despite everything, I am not a cruel person. I know what it feels like to have nothing, to feel abandoned. And I will not do to you what you did to me." Kayamaka's mother wiped her eyes. "You are kind, Adana. You have a good heart." Adana sighed, leaning forward. "I will help you," she said, watching as their faces lit up with relief. "But things will not go back to how they were. This is not about revenge, it is about fairness." Chief Okeke's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I will provide you with a home and enough funds to rebuild your lives, but there will be conditions," Adana said, her voice steady. "You will have to work for it. I will set up a small business for you, but you will manage it on your own. I will not let you depend on me indefinitely." A stunned silence followed. Kayamika's mother gasped, her hands trembling. You would do this for us?" Adana nodded. "I have spent too much time being bitter. I have everything I need: love, success, a good home. Holding on to resentment will only weigh me down. You will have your chance to start over, but you must prove you have learned from your mistakes." Chief Okeke looked at his wife and daughter, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and gratitude. "Thank you, Adana," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We do not deserve your kindness." "No, you don't," Adana replied honestly. "But kindness is not about what people deserve. It is about breaking the cycle of pain." Kayamika swallowed hard, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry," she whispered. "For everything." Adana studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "I hope you mean that." She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. Obinna, who had remained silent but supportive by her side, placed a gentle hand on her back. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly. She turned to him with a warm smile. "Yes, I am sure." As she stepped outside into the evening air, she felt lighter. She had taken back her power, not through vengeance, but through grace. She had proven that she was stronger than the circumstances that tried to break her. With Obinna by her side, she walked forward, leaving the past behind. Adana was no longer the girl they had forced into marriage. She was no longer the abandoned child begging for love. She was a woman of strength, compassion, and dignity. And this time she chose peace.